I am 89 years old, and 4 years after my husband Calvin died, I sat in this house on a Sunday afternoon, and I understood, quietly, completely without drama, that my children had forgotten me. Not forgotten that I existed. They knew I existed. They called on birthdays and holidays and occasionally in between. They were not bad children. They were busy children, which is a different thing, and for a long time I confused the two, and it cost me years I could have spent differently. I'm going to tell you what I did when I understood what had happened, not what I felt. I will get to that, but what I did, because what I did changed everything. Not immediately, not without difficulty, but changed it in ways that are still real today, 4 years later, at 89 years old, with 3 children who now show up in this house in ways they did not before, because I finally understood what was actually happening and stopped doing the things that were making it worse. I spent 38 years as a pediatric nurse at Shreveport Memorial. I have taken care of other people's frightened children since before most of you were born. I buried my son Derek in 2008. He was 47 years old, and he left a hole in this family that his absence fills every single holiday still. I buried Calvin in 2014 after 52 years of waking up next to him. I lost Pearl, who was my closest friend and my nursing colleague for 29 years. I lost my brother Eugene. I have had sufficient acquaintance with loss to know the difference between the kind that is final and the kind that still has a door in it. The distance from my children had a door in it. I just had to figure out how to find it, and then I had to figure out how to walk through it without my pride getting in the way. That is what I am going to tell you today. Let me tell you who I am before you decide whether any of this applies to your situation. I am not a victim. I want to establish that immediately because this story is easy to hear as a story about children who failed their mother, and that is not what it is. That is the version I told myself for about 3 years, and it felt true while I was telling it, and it was the version that kept me stuck. I grew up in Shreveport, the oldest of 5 children, in a family where my mother worked and my father worked and the children helped, and nobody had a great deal of time for feelings that couldn't be expressed quickly and set aside. We were loved. We knew we were loved. It was demonstrated through action, through food and presence and sacrifice, and it was almost never stated directly, because stating it directly was not how we did things. I raised my 3 children, Marcus, Denise, and the son I lost, Derek, in the same language. Love through action, love through providing, love through showing up in the physical, practical ways that our family understood as love. I did not say it often. I showed it constantly, and I assumed for 50 years of mothering that they were receiving what I was giving. I started nursing in 1959. I was 23 years old, and I worked the pediatric ward at Shreveport Memorial. And what I learned in 38 years of caring for sick children is the thing I should have applied to my own family 30 years before I did. What a person needs and what a person is able to ask for are almost never the same thing. And the gap between those two things is where most of the suffering in family life lives. The moment this whole story crystallized for me was a Sunday afternoon in February of 2018. Calvin had been gone for 4 years. I was 84 years old. The house was quiet in the particular way it is quiet on a Sunday afternoon when you expected someone and they did not come. Marcus had said he would try to stop by. He had not stopped by. He had not called to say he wasn't stopping by. I sat in this living room with the afternoon going dark around me, and I thought, when did I become optional? That question was the beginning of everything that changed. Here is the thing I need you to understand before I tell you what I did, because without understanding it, everything I describe will sound like a set of tactics, and it is not tactics. It is a shift in understanding that made the tactics possible. For the 4 years between Calvin's death and that Sunday in February of 2018, I operated from an assumption that went like this. I had given my children everything. I had sacrificed and provided and showed up and been there. I had earned through that giving a certain level of return. And the return I was not receiving was evidence that something had gone wrong in them, that they had become selfish or busy in ways that crowded out what mattered, or had simply forgotten the weight of what they owed. That assumption felt righteous. It felt factually correct, and it was producing consistently and reliably the exact situation I was suffering from. Because here is what I finally understood on that Sunday afternoon, sitting in the darkening living room. My children were not failing to visit because they had forgotten their obligations. They were failing to visit because visiting had gradually, over years, become something that cost them more than it gave them. Not because they didn't love me, because the visits had taken on a weight, the weight of my grief, my need, my unspoken accounting of what they owed, that made coming feel like a duty rather than a pleasure. And people are very good at being unavailable for duty. They are surprisingly available for pleasure. This is the paradox that I had to sit with before anything could change. The love I needed from my children was being blocked by the way I was holding the love I had given them. The account I had opened, the invisible account of sacrifice and obligation, was the thing standing between me and what I actually wanted. And the account was mine. I had opened it. I had been maintaining it, and I was the only one who could close it. Closing it was the hardest thing I have done in 89 years of living. And I am going to tell you exactly how I did it. The first thing I did was the thing I resisted longest, and that made the most difference. I told the truth to one of my children about how I actually was. Not the managed version, not the I'm fine, just a little lonely sometimes version that I'd been offering for 4 years as a combination of honesty and protection. The actual truth, the specific, detailed, undignified truth about what my days looked like, how the Sundays felt, what it was like to wake up in a house that no longer had Calvin's breathing in it. How I had stopped cooking real meals because cooking for one person felt like a diminishment of everything cooking had ever meant in this house. I called Denise on a Tuesday morning in March of 2018. Denise is my middle child, and she has always been the one who listens past what you're saying to what you mean the way certain people can. I called her and I said, Denise, I need to tell you something true about how things are here, and I need you to just listen for a few minutes without trying to fix it. She said, Okay, Mama. I talked for 20 minutes. about Calvin, about Derek, about the Sundays, about what I needed that I didn't know how to ask for, about how long I had been not asking, about the invisible account I had been keeping, and what a poor substitute it had been for just saying, I am lonely and I need you, and I don't know how to tell you that without it feeling like I am failing at something. When I finished, Denise was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mama, why didn't you tell us sooner? I said, because I was raised not to ask. She said, I know, so were we. But we're going to have to figure out something different. She came that Saturday. She has come most Saturdays since. Not because I guilted her, because I finally opened the door instead of standing behind it, waiting for her to find it. The second thing I did was stop treating their lives as interruptions to the conversation about my life. This one is harder to say because it requires admitting something about myself that I was not proud of when I saw it clearly. When my children called, which they did on birthdays and holidays and occasionally in between, I had developed a habit, without knowing I had it, of redirecting the conversation back to myself, to what I was going through, to Calvin's absence, to the things that had gotten harder, to the ways the house was too quiet and the weeks were too long. Not because I was selfish exactly, because I was in pain and the phone call was the container I had for the pain, and I poured the pain into it every time one became available. What I eventually understood is what I should have known from 38 years of nursing. A person who calls in distress needs to be heard first. And if every call they make to you ends with them consoling you, they stop calling. Not because they don't love you, because they cannot afford the emotional cost of a call that was supposed to be connection and became instead a transfer of weight they didn't come equipped to carry. I started asking about them, genuinely, specifically, with the kind of interest that requires you to remember what they said last time and follow up on it this time. Marcus had been dealing with something at work for months, and I had known about it in the general way you know things you haven't fully paid attention to. I started paying attention. I started asking, how did that situation resolve? How are you feeling about it now? I started listening the way I listened on the pediatric ward, fully, without preparing my next sentence while they were still talking. The calls got longer. They started calling more. Not because I had performed interest, but because I was actually interested, and people can feel the difference, and the difference is everything. The third thing I did was create a reason for them to come that was not about my need. This is the practical one, the one that sounds the least important, and that turned out to be profoundly important. After that conversation with Denise, I started thinking about what had made this house a place people wanted to be when Calvin was alive and the children were young and the door was always open. And what I kept coming back to was Sunday dinner. The specific, reliable, non-negotiable Sunday dinner that I had maintained for 30 years of their childhood and had quietly discontinued after Calvin died because it felt pointless to cook a full Sunday dinner for one person. I brought it back. Not weekly. I was honest with myself about what I could manage. Every other Sunday, I called each of my children and I said, I am cooking Sunday dinner on the 14th, and I would like you to come. not because I need you to come, because I want to cook for people I love and eat with them at this table, and that is a thing I have not done in 4 years, and I am ready to do it again. Marcus came. Denise came and brought her husband. Even my daughter-in-law, Derek's widow, came with the grandchildren. The table that had been too big for one person was exactly the right size. I did not talk about being lonely. I cooked, I fed people, I listened, I laughed. And at the end of the evening, when everyone was leaving and the kitchen smelled the way the kitchen is supposed to smell on a Sunday, Marcus put his coat on and said, "Mom, we should do this more often." I said, "We should. Second Sunday of every month." He said, "I'll be here." He has been here every second Sunday since. The fourth thing I did was the quietest and in some ways the most important. I built a life that did not depend on whether they showed up. This is the one that sounds like giving up, and it is not giving up. It is the opposite of giving up. It is deciding that your life is going to be full regardless of any one relationship, which is the only condition under which any relationship can be freely and genuinely given rather than desperately required. After the conversation with Denise and the Sunday dinners, I also started doing things for myself that had nothing to do with my children. I joined a weekly card game at the senior center that I had been avoiding because it sounded to me like organized waiting, and I was not interested in organized waiting. I was wrong about what it was. It was 8 women who met on Thursday mornings and who, over the course of a year, became some of the most important people in my life. One of them, a woman named Celestine, who is 82 and sharp as a tack and funnier than anyone I have met in decades, became a real friend. The kind of friend you call on a Tuesday for no reason, and she calls you back. I started gardening again in the backyard, which I had abandoned after Calvin died because the garden had been Calvin's project, and getting back into it had felt like trespassing on his memory. I trespassed. I planted tomatoes in the spring of 2019 and stood in Calvin's garden and talked to him about it out loud, the way I talk to him sometimes when the house is quiet and something loosened in me that had been tight since 2014, when my life started to be full. Genuinely, specifically, variably full, something changed in how my children experienced me. The calls stopped being tinged with the thing they had been tinged with. I was not available every moment in a way that communicated urgency. I had things to tell them about, things that were not about loss, things that were happening in my life that were worth reporting. And they started calling to find out what was happening, which is a very different thing from calling because they felt they should. The fifth thing, and I want to say this one carefully because it is the one I am least proud of and most certain about, is that I had to let go of the accounting. I told you earlier about the invisible account I had been keeping, the record of sacrifice, the calculation of what was owed. I had been carrying that account for years, updating it silently, never showing it to anyone but allowing it to color every interaction with a weight that everyone could feel and no one could name. Letting go of it was not one moment. It was a practice, something I had to do deliberately, repeatedly, over months. Every time I felt the calculation starting, every time I thought about what I had given and what I was not receiving, I had to redirect, not to denial, to the present, to what was actually in front of me right now, which was not a ledger, which was my son's voice on the phone, or my daughter's car pulling into the driveway, or my grandchildren at the Sunday table. Pearl, my old friend, had said something to me years before she died that I did not fully understand when she said it. She said, "Ruth, love is not a debt. It is a weather. You cannot collect it. You can only make yourself a place where it is likely to rain." I had been trying to collect something that can only be given freely, and the collecting was exactly what was preventing the giving. When I stopped collecting, something changed, not all at once, gradually, over months. The visits became easier. The calls became warmer. Marcus started dropping by without an occasion, which had not happened since before Calvin died. Denise started texting me things she found funny, small things, the kind of casual contact that means someone is thinking about you in the ordinary moments of their day. They had not forgotten me. They had been keeping a careful distance from the weight of my need. And when I set the weight down, they came closer. It was that simple and that hard. I want to stop and speak directly to you now, because I know what you are doing. You are watching this and you are thinking about your situation, and you are finding the places where it is different from mine. Your children are busier. Your circumstances are more complicated. You have given more and received less, and the accounting is more unambiguous than anything I have described. Maybe. Some of that may be true. But I want to ask you one question before you use the differences to exempt yourself from what I am saying. When is the last time your children left an interaction with you feeling better than when they started? Not obligated, not burdened, not relieved it was over. Better, lighter, more themselves. If you cannot answer that quickly, you have your work to do. And right now, while you are sitting here watching me, one of your children is somewhere in their life, managing their work, their marriage, their children, their worries, and somewhere underneath all of that, the relationship with you is present. It is either a weight they are managing or a place they want to come back to. You have more influence over which one it is than you are currently using. The door is still open. They have not forgotten you. They have gotten careful with you, which is a different thing and a fixable thing, but it requires you to go first, to open the thing you have been protecting, to tell the true thing, to set down the account. Go first. I'll tell you plainly where I am. I am 89 years old, and my body knows more about its own limits now than it did when I was pretending otherwise, and the end of this road is not invisible to me anymore. That is not frightening. It is just true. The way most true things are quiet rather than loud. What I think about in the mornings when the house is waking up and the light is coming through the kitchen window is not my own end. I think about the parents watching this right now who are in their 80s, their late 70s, who have less time than I had when I finally figured this out, who are sitting in a house that is too quiet and telling themselves a story about why that is their children's fault, and who could start a different story today if they decided to. You could start a different story today. The door is yours to open. It has always been yours to open. And the people on the other side of it, your children, your grandchildren, the people who came from you and who carry you in ways they may not even be aware of, they are waiting, even if they don't know they are waiting, for you to open it. Open it. Here is what I want you to do today. Not when you feel ready, because you may not feel ready for a while, and ready is not the standard. Today, call one of your children, not to tell them what they have failed to give you, not to present the accounting, just to ask how they are, and then be quiet enough for long enough to actually hear the answer, the real answer, the one underneath the fine. Ask a follow-up question. Remember something from the last conversation and ask about it. Be the person they call because they want to, not the person they call because they must. Then this week, do one thing that has nothing to do with your children. Join something. Call someone who is not your family. Plant something. Cook something for no particular reason, and eat it at the table with a place set because you are worth the setting. Start becoming a person whose life is full enough that your children are one of several good things in it, rather than the weight-bearing wall that will collapse without them. And if there is something you have been waiting for them to say first, an apology, an acknowledgement, a recognition of what you gave, consider the possibility that you might get those things eventually as a consequence of what I am describing. But consider also that waiting for them to say it first may be the thing keeping you from the life that is available to you right now. I spent 38 years taking care of other people's children, and the thing I know after all of it is this. The children who came back to their parents most consistently, most freely, most fully, they did not come back out of obligation. They came back because their parents had made themselves a place worth coming back to. Make yourself that place. The rest will follow.